2 full weeks of racing action, 5 new champions crowned, a ton of news and some European karting as the icing on the cake. This looks like a job for me. Hello and welcome fellow motorsports fans. The last 2 properly stacked weeks of feeder series racing are behind us, and that means we've got lots of stories to talk about, from K&B completing an epic season to Freddie Slater making history in FRECA. No time to waste. The first ever trip to Monza for GB3 has not only resulted in a few classic Monza carnage races, it also allowed us to end the season with a few great storylines. First of all, we did see more domination from Alex Ninovic in race 1. The Aussie was not willing to slow down despite already being champion, of course. And this rapid pace in race 1 set us up for a proper feel-good story in race 2, where Deegan Fairclough finally secured his first win of the year ahead of Ninovic. Not only was it cool to see last year's British F4 title protagonists back at it, Fairclough leaving this year without a win would have been a little shocking, all things considered. We have talked about High-Tech dropping the ball this year, but don't let that fool you. Fairclough is quite the talent, possibly still the most interesting one among the full season runners if you ask me. Meanwhile, the other Australian frontrunner Patrick Huizenroder just about did enough to hang on to P2 in the championship. Rewind the clock to this winter, where Huizenroder managed to properly impress for the very first time in his short driving career, and then consider the season he has had since. What an outstanding year from a driver nobody rated whatsoever in 2024 if we're honest. And I like the way that he did it too. Very consistent in a car that wasn't necessarily a frontrunner, and usually able to work his way forward in the races as well. We do have to talk about the debutants, of course. What a weekend it has been for the new faces on the grid. Yeah, sure, Isaac Phelps may have had the same pretty forgettable performance we've been used to from elite motorsports drivers in the series at this point, but both Newman Chi and Maxime Rehm did rather well in their cameo for Hillspeed. And crucially, Rehm even did well enough to not only win the reverse grid, he did it in style. Man actually had the pace to stay out of attacking range from Fairclough despite the DRS. Consider for a moment how disappointing Rehm's Italian F4 season has been. From getting into incidents to some horrendous luck, he really had little going for him. Except for his obvious pace. Guy knows how to drive cars fast, there is little doubt about that. Seeing him adjust so quickly to the GB3 car gives me hope that wherever he ends up next year is going to be just the change of scenery he really needs to shine. The surprisingly epic season of Euroformula Open has ended at Monza as well, and it delivered some epic racing for one last time. I really can't wait to see what the future holds for this series, but the grid can certainly be expected to grow again for 2026. Whether it'll ever reach its old peak remains a different question, of course. Crucially, I think these cars put on far and away the best wheel-to-wheel racing across this particular level of the feeder series, and really only the Euro Cup 3 car even comes close. Tymek Kucharczyk may have missed out on an F3 seat yet again, but he did what he could by winning the title in an epic photo finish during the second race. Even David did what he could, but the higher number of basically DNF races cost him the title in the end. Not only is this huge for Kucharczyk, it is an incredible result for BVM Racing, the small Italian team finally beating the German giant Motorpark that has been dominating the series with its massive fleet of cars. Definitely an emotional win for all parties involved. Now, let us collectively hope that this isn't the end of the road for Kucharczyk's single-seater career. Can't talk about this week without a shout out for Everett Stack. The American youngster has found himself on the podium across all 3 races, bagged his second ever car racing victory, and did it all rather convincingly as well. Kid looked proper racy and a far cry from the crashy rookie we've had to watch in F4 last season. I think he might lack a lengthy karting background or something, because while he started as one of the worst drivers on last year's Italian F4 grid, he has been developing at a rapid rate and looks a lot more at home on these grids right now. Although of course, Euroformula Open isn't exactly the biggest test of one's ability. The Formula Regional Americas has come to a conclusion at Barber, and I am unbelievably happy to report that friend of the show Titus Sherlock has lived up to our, and I reckon his own, pre-season expectations after all by coming out on top of the intense title battle. Unfortunately, the finale wasn't quite as epic as expected, once both Nico Ambiado and Bruno Ribeiro suffered mechanical issues in race 1, handing the title over to Sherlock without a proper battle. Sherlock still managed to shine on track as well, with a win and a close P2 behind Brady Golden. All in all, a well-deserved champion considering the terrible luck he has had to deal with early in the year. Assuming the next logical step is to use the prize money to help fund the seat in Indy Next, Sherlock will have a lot of work to do as the step up in grid quality is quite considerable, but of course we do wish him the best of luck. Then again, since he hasn't been doing any of the testing Indy Next has been doing recently, even that step is far from confirmed at the moment. A brief word about US F4 dominator Kucharczyk, who abandoned his successful program in favour of a debut in the quicker car, and man, did he make the most of it. Sure, it did require the aforementioned mechanical shenanigans, but a podium in your very first race is a great achievement no matter what, especially when you do it right at the end of the year. Definitely some foreshadowing for one of next year's title protagonists, I think. A week later, things have also ended for the European Formula Regional, and not gonna lie, the final round was a tad underwhelming with incidents for both Enzo Dolini and Matteo De Paulo gifting the title to Freddie Slater with a race to spare. It really was the classic Monza chaos. On the bright side, at least it gave both De Paulo and especially Dolini the chance to show off a bit with how easily they managed to charge back up the pack. All in all, it has been a fantastic season in FRECA with Trident, RSGP and Prema trading blows round after round. Now, if only the cars were as racy as their Euroformula Open counterparts, eh? Either way, the top three, plus Evan Gilter, all leave the season with quite a momentum if you ask me, and I can't wait for the De Paulo vs Slater matchup in equal machinery next year. I will of course be doing a proper full season review for FRECA, so we can keep things short and sweet here, but I do have to mention our two debutants once again, filling the rent-a-ride seats over at RPM. Spanish F4 frontrunner Jan Przowski and former Italian F4 competitor Thomas Stoltzemanis, the latter having abandoned his campaign early this year for what appears to be budget issues, at least when judging by the lack of sponsors currently on display by the young Latvian. Not too much to say about Stoltzemanis' debut as such. Sure, he got decent results in the same range we've seen from other RPM runners, but he did heavily rely on carnage ahead, particularly in race 2. Meanwhile, Przowski actually did an excellent job right out the gate, proving to be the best RPM ringer so far by putting on a mighty P5 in the final race of the season. Of course, we know about the ability of the Polish driver, but after a year of getting spanked by Thomas Strauven, this must have felt rather good for Przowski. And it raises questions about his program next year. Could he be a FRECA frontrunner in his maiden season? Time will tell, but the ingredients seem to be there. And with not one but two races behind us, we do have to talk about F1 as well, starting with the spicy weekend at COTA. The drama in the sprint may have not been the fault of a breakdown of papaya rules. It was in fact about as racing incident as it gets, but it still left us with one key bit of insight going forwards. Max Verstappen may just have a title chance after all. I've been sitting here throughout the last couple of rounds, refusing to get my hopes up because the McLaren advantage looked too overwhelming, even for the comfortably best driver on the grid. But between Red Bull closing the pace gap and the fact that the McLaren boys will be taking points off of each other more aggressively going forward, I'm actually starting to believe again. The most convincing point is that at this rate, Max doesn't even need that much good luck anymore to do it, and I'd almost bet on at least one proper McLaren crash, not counting the 3 wide turn 1 incident in the sprint. Anyone else believing again, or am I high on the copium? Share your thoughts down below. This was of course meant to be my take right after COTA, but despite the Norris domination in Mexico, I can still definitely see Max turning this into a proper title battle. Meanwhile, while we did get robbed of the late race battle the drivers spent so long setting up, Mexico not only produced a pretty exciting motor race all around, it also gives me the opportunity for a well-deserved shout-out. Congrats to Ollie Behrman for not only matching Haas' best ever result, but by doing so completely on merit against an army of, in theory, quicker cars behind and even dragging the Haas into podium contention. What an outstanding performance from the youngster who is seemingly dedicating his early days in F1 to ending Esteban Ocon's career. And as much as it pains me personally, As far as the Battle of the Rookies is concerned, he really showed Antonelli what the current pecking order is like as well. Spanish F4 is somehow still going strong with another round to come in November, but the Belgian dominator Thomas Strauven has already completed his quest for the title comfortably. Strauven really was on another level to the rest of the grid, particularly his Campos teammates, and has even kept up the mad streak of only 2 races outside the podium positions. Then again, Strauven having an epic season is hardly news at this point. More interestingly, René Lammers has gone back ahead of MP teammate and rookie star Ian Eichmans in the battle for P2. The gap to Strauven is of course huge, but the former European karting champion is still putting together an admirable season. And let's not forget he has been screwed by penalties like nobody else. Nevertheless, I personally hope Eichmans can fight back in Barcelona. He has easily been the most important character to come out of this championship in my opinion. While we're talking about MP, what the fuck is going on with Juan Cota this year? After finally having a proper front-running weekend last time, he had a proper shocker here. Sure, Spanish F4 is chaotic and all, but I still expected far more from the man who dragged DriveX near the title hunt last season. Getting beaten by 3 of his teammates, and in mad dominating fashion by 2 of them, was certainly not on my bingo card before the season. And a shout out for a guy we've not talked about yet at all, TC Racing driver Santino Panetta, who has finally managed to score his first couple of points in the first race this weekend. And crucially, it was a pretty merited P7 with no mad chaos or anything further up the road. Huge drive and a good way to get some recognition despite driving for a struggling team. It has to be said, Spanish F4 might not have closed the gap to the Italian F4 on the sharp end, but the midfield is as difficult to read into, with most drivers basically never even in position to fight for points. In a similar fashion, I've wanted to highlight the return of the Carras brothers. After the disastrous opening round with Sherlock and the subsequent withdrawal of the team, the twins had been out of F4 for most of the year until a couple of weeks ago when they returned to the Spanish F4 with G4 Racing. And as far as I can tell, the Swiss outfit is doing a much better job providing equipment, as at least Jean-Paul Carras was running not far outside the points this weekend. Maybe they lucked their way into the points during the final round. We've had the second round of Saudi F4 as well, once again at Bahrain, making for pretty familiar results across the board. Adam Al-Azhari and Kit Belowski dominated 1 race each, leaving them as the primary championship contenders for the time being. I cannot overstate how impressed I am by Belowski. I sincerely hope this campaign can help him find some sponsors going forward. Red Bull Junior Scott Lindblom has really made a step forward this weekend, something I unfortunately cannot say about either Chiara Batik or Tibor Amikas. Lindblom did of course compete in the Ginetta Juniors as his full season program, and truth be told, I wasn't awfully impressed with his performance there. Though, admittedly, I was largely down to the direct comparison with fellow Red Bull Junior Rocco Coronel. Without a Coronel-esque emerging star in the mix, Lindblom does at the very least have some pace to impress here. Ari Bansel has joined the championship after missing a last round in favour of Italian F4, and I am happy to report that at the very least he could play to his strengths. Not hugely impressive results on paper, but he did do what he does best by methodically working his way up the order, all the way to a neat P2 in the final race. I do feel like qualifying might be Banzel's biggest weakness for the time being. He does need to find another gear in that department if he wants any success in the dense Italian F4 field next season. The title fight in the Japanese F4 will continue into the final round, but Itsuki Sato has managed this weekend at the top of the list well enough to be a comfortable favourite, though his much younger rival Tokiya Suzuki got the better of him here. Suzuki had both a dominant win in race 1 and a solid attacking drive in race 2, crucially one that included an overtake past Sato on track. I've said it before, but since I know most of us don't follow Japanese F4 too closely, I'll say it again. Tokiya Suzuki is easily the most interesting prospect this season, no matter the end result, when considering his lack of experience compared to Sato and a lot of the other frontrunners for that matter. And I am glad to report we've had a bit of a rookie breakthrough in the Toyota camp, with Masana Muto scoring his maiden podium out of nowhere and really running a solid weekend across the board. The second race might have not been a podium contending run, but still good enough to show that the first wasn't just a fluke. About time we figure out who the big players might be next season. And last but not least, the E4 Championship has also come to an end, officially signalling the end of the ACI season as a whole. And in a rather fitting way, KNB dominated the weekend, showing true mastery of safety car restarts next to his usual speed and earned himself a dominant title as a reward. I am really delighted with how KNB has been carrying himself all year long, really making up for his still good but not quite up to our high expectations performance from last season. Equally, having not just the fantastic Gabriel Gomez but also Reno Franco up on the season podium just felt right to me. Franco's turnaround ever since he got back with PHM was rather remarkable. Sure, he is more experienced than most on this level, but he is still putting it all together while running for a single car team. Guy absolutely deserves some respect for that, I reckon. I've wanted to highlight a different driver we've not talked about all year and a phenomenon that goes along with it. Ilya Weiss and the excellent display of how big the team disparity can be in low-level spec series like E4. The German IEME senior champ has been nothing but an anonymous backmarker all year as he was driving for the ever underperforming Kram Motorsport. And of course, since expectations for Weiss weren't exactly sky high anyway, we would have never known how much of that is down to him and how much to the team. Fortunately, he got a chance to finish the season in a Genta and oh boy did he make use of it. Scored his first ever points and would have been on for a really good third race if not for the usual Monza chaos. Keep in mind, Genta is the sort of team that still struggles to get into the points on a consistent basis, so with that context, I felt it was a surprisingly great weekend. I am really hoping we get to see him in a Genta-esque team for a full season next year. In a similar fashion, the Wikipedia results checking gang might be inclined to highlight Niccolò Maccangiani in the same way for the admittedly impressive result of a P6 in race 3. Unfortunately though, I have to inform you that he only got there with major chaos up the road, so we're really none the wiser when it comes to his skill level. Guess we'll have to wait for 2026 for that one. Not only did we have a lot of racing over the past 2 weekends, we also had a bunch of news for 2026. We'll kick off the news in FRECA with GB3 champion Alex Ninovic officially announced for Rodin's maiden FRECA campaign. While it is a bit sad to see Ninovic miss out on a direct step up to F3, it is a great move from Rodin to bring in a known quantity for their first season in the series, and hopefully Ninovic will make the jump to F3 for 2027. Moving on to Formula 2 news, Noël Léon has been announced to drive for Campos in 2026. He might have had a shit 2025, you can hear all about that in my F3 review linked up here somewhere, but the step up to F2 is still a very sensible one, and I do regard this season as a massive outlier and not representative of his ability. The only slight question mark for me is the quality of Campos as a squad, meaning I reckon the team has been doing too well to gamble on a driver like that in my opinion. And I'm guessing that means Tramnitz will most likely not get a competitive car, which I'm not particularly pleased about. The final question regarding Colton Herta's F2 campaign has been answered as Hitech has announced him as a driver. Hitech has potentially been the fastest team in 2024, at least they were in the mix, and have given Browning the tools for a good season this year as well. So it definitely sounds like a reasonable destination for Herta, though I would have probably looked at Invicta first if I was him. Then again, he isn't there to necessarily win the championship, so as long as he doesn't find himself with Trident, he should be okay. And last but not least, with Noël Léon taking a Campos seat in F2, somebody had to make room first, and that somebody is Pepe Marti. The Spaniard has scored himself a Formula E seat, going up against Dan Ticktum for Kiro Cupra. Considering he's replacing the massively struggling David Beckman, doing better than his predecessor should be a pretty low bar for the former Red Bull Junior. Since Marti was never a true F1 contender, jumping straight into a proper professional seat is far and away the best he could have hoped for. He will have one hell of an opponent though if we look at the phenomenal form Ticktum has been presenting last season. We'll cover more of the news gone by next week, but since this episode is already really stacked, it is now finally time for the return of our quick weekly Karting Report. The 3-round-long WSK Final Cup has kicked off at Franciacorta last weekend, And while 7 classes is a bit too much to run you through, I did want to talk about some of them anyway. In the youngest of the categories, the Mini Under 10s, we've had a bit of a sensational result with Kucharczyk winning his final during his first race with the Red Bull Junior team. Red Bull has apparently quietly signed 2 new karting drivers, the other one being Mason Robertson, now graduated to the OKN Juniors. And while I personally don't really agree with signing 9-year-olds, Kucharczyk is certainly a sensible pickup among that crowd. We've talked about him a few times earlier in the year, so it shouldn't come as a surprise that he is among the best in his age bracket. In general, it was quite interesting to see 4 American licensed drivers in the top 5 in a European event like this. For the slightly older Mini Group 3, we could talk about Victor Goron driving to another American anthem on the podium, but I'd rather highlight the guys finishing in P5 and P6. Mini superstar Nicolo Perico, who got dumped during the battle for the lead but will surely remain a title contender, and Devin Titz, fresh off the back of his flawless German mini karting title to his first great international result. Not only did he charge to a P5, he put it on pole position on Friday as well and would have likely been a win contender without a few incidents that can surely be avoided in the future. You might know I'm a huge Titz fan, so we keep an eye on his progress for the future. And last but not least, in the OK Juniors we've had quite a few great developments to watch. Noah Baglan and Michael McGoy at the sharp end is no surprise, and neither is Dean Hugendorn fighting at the front as well before he got slapped by a penalty. But we answered a few key questions from around the World Championship. Daniel Miron Lorente has finally made a critical step forward, was a firm top 10 runner all weekend and ultimately brought home a P5, which I think is his best OK Junior result to date. Definitely expect him to be a win contender throughout 2026. Similarly, we did talk about the breakout run from Oskari Wally during the pre-race for the World Championship, and I am so glad to report that he actually kept the form up here and was a proper front runner as well. Looks like he'll be a more consistent addition to the points paying positions next season. And finally, Alexander Leganki, Mini Under 10 dominator in 2023, has finally made the step up from the OKN Juniors to OK Juniors, and has immediately found his feet among the much harder competition as well. Once again, a name we'll talk about more next year, no doubt. So many more potential stories, as always, during a karting weekend, but we'll skip those for now. I'm sure we'll talk about the KZ2 and OK at some point during this short season as well, but this episode has really been dragging on long enough, hasn't it? Next week, there won't be much single-seater action, but the Ayami Warrior final to discuss, and maybe the less dense racing action means I can get to work on some of those season reviews. But now, it is your time to leave all of your thoughts and opinions down in the comments so we can get our lovely little discussion going. And otherwise, I thank you all for watching and I do hope to catch you in the next one.